So thanks for showing up, everybody. Thank you for being this part of this amazing community that is together stewarding all of our seed commons into the future. I'm calling in today from the Kwantlen and Stolo First Nations land in what some people now refer to as the Lower Mainland or Langley. And I know we're calling from across all kinds of unceded lands across the province, and we are here working with seeds that have been, I just like to thank everybody for stewarding them into the future, and let's just acknowledge that they came to us from a lot of stewards, and just show our greatest respect for all the hands and seen and unseen that brought us the seeds today. So we have three speakers on the panel here to answer your questions. I'm going to introduce them very quickly. Mel Sylvestre is here. Mel has been working on small-scale organic farms for almost 20 years, holds a Bachelor of Science in Soil and Plant Science from UBC. She's a founding member of BC EcoSeed Co-op and has been swimming in the love of seed saving for over a dozen years. She started her own small-scale farm 2 years ago in Gibsons on the Sunshine Coast, and she's been a great part of our network over these years. So thanks for showing up. We have Matthew as well. Matthew is a father and a seed saver in the Victoria region. He holds a BA with double majors in environmental studies and political science and an MA in environmental education and communication. Though he acknowledges that much of his practical knowledge has been learned from mentors outside of the walls of these institutions. I think a lot of us get a lot of knowledge from outside of the walls of those institutions, so that's great. And we also have Jolene Swain with us. Jolene's a seed production farmer of short season seeds up in the Kispiox Valley in Gitskan territory, growing seeds in bulk for BC EcoSeed Co-op and in smaller quantities for local farming and gardening communities in the Northwest and the Cariboo. Jolene is a biologist turned seed farmer, and we all know that once you get the seed bug, you have the seed bug. So I think without further ado, let's just jump into questions. I guess you guys have probably met this morning either to do your own in-person seed workshop, or maybe people on the call have seen the very basic seed saving workshop. So this is your opportunity now to get all your questions answered. So feel free to either, you can put them in the chat, or if you'd like to speak them out, just raise your hand, either with an emoji or by waving like this, and we'll try to get your questions answered. I see Nick waving at us.
We had one question of, because we're looking at the slide about wild mustard and how it's developed into broccoli and kale. How long would it take if you started with the wild mustard plant to then select for and get to one of those things? Good luck.
My guess is that you better try to make children so that they can work on that project with you. I think like all of those plants that came from that wild mustard and kind of became something that we know on our food and table right now. It's even more than a century we're talking about. I think it's just developed with humans as we evolve. There's probably faster way to do it now with technology. If you go through our hybridization and all that things, but if you're going to do it like the kind of natural selection way, and giving most of those will be fall into a category of biannuals too, then it take 2 seasons to get through it. So that's my well estimate, but I've never personally, like I've taken some seed breeding project that already have taken like more than almost a decade, and they're not even there yet. So starting from something so far and going to something completely different, yeah, I'm guessing we're talking about a few generations, but I don't know if anybody else on the panel. I know, David, you work with brassica more than anybody else that I know. Maybe you know a bit more about that.
I was going to guess about 3,000 years.
Not to discourage anybody here. I think there's great project that could be done, and I think and I think something that's it's important to say too is that like, when you're starting with a project and you have this goal, anything along the way may be edible. So at each generation you're transforming, it's not a waste of time. It's not like you can be, and that's what I think happened, and that's why we're all kind of addicted to these processes. That like you think you're going somewhere, and then the plan's proving you wrong. The plan's teaching you that like, oh, actually, no, I want to do this. And if you have a good sense of observation, you may be like, oh, this is actually way more interesting, or way easier to work with the plan in this way. Maybe we should go in this direction. So that it's a journey more than like an end result or a goal. You should have in mind when you start those kind of projects too.
Yeah, feel free to throw questions in the chat, everybody. Just further to that answer, I'll just say, I'm not sure if the sort of diagram you were maybe referring to is that there's it's called the circle of U or so, the triangle of U, that shows the historical, how those crops all developed historically. And maybe the way you look at that diagram, it looks like you could cross these different, you know, species with one another, but keep in mind, those intercrossing of species, it does happen, but very, very, very rarely. And unlike Mel said, unless you use modern technology, it's very rare that that happens. So those kind of diagrams they're like long-term evolutionary theories of these plants, not so much to be used like in a short-term, hey, let's try to cross a Brassica nigra with a Brassica juncae, because maybe it's possible. Probably good to know that it might be possible. So if while we're in the process of our seed breeding and you come up with a 1 in 100 year episode that actually happens and you're able to identify it, then we're better off for it, but pretty rare.
In Susan Ashworth's seed saving book, it says that in Rome in about 201 BC, several kinds of kales and cabbages were described, and that we've been saving various forms of Brassicaceae since early artwork and literature has dated back. So as far as we've been recording it, there's been various brassicas. So yeah, I think your estimate of 3,000 is pretty good.
There's a question in the chat here. What is the minimum amount of onion plants to grow for seed? In brackets for long term. So I'm going to assume long term means to do a really good job of seed saving.
I think it's at least I'm going to say 40 as a minimum, but I think you want a lot of onions just for the population genetics, probably closer to 80 or 100. And then as for long-term seed saving, onion seed is one of the seeds that doesn't have the greatest shelf life. So if you want to grow a lot of seed, you want to make sure you put it into some fairly permanent long-term storage, and where it can be left if you want to kind of get back to it as a seed bank in 5 to 10 years. Otherwise, onion seed is known for kind of losing its germination within a year. So you want to make sure you're storing it really well. But yeah, maybe someone else knows the more exact number. I don't have the chart in front of me, the seed garden table.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but yeah, I think you're right. It's like, I mean, for most cross pollinators, it's always between, like, we have a category that's like between 80 to 100 seems to be the general agreement. And then there's a category that's even up to like 150 to 200. And I think onion might be actually falling in that even more unknowingly, because like
Yeah,
Jolene
maybe.
say, like the more your minimum population is, the more you have to grow, but the more you also have to try to move it very fast, because in that case, they won't keep. I think a note also on onions, like, yeah, it's generally commonly understood and known that onion are good for 1 year. I think when you save the seed yourself, and it's if they're well kept, like beyond, not even beyond, like, vacuum sealing them or anything like that, but just well kept, like in a good way, like the way you would do with most of your seeds. If it's your own seeds, I think you could dare 2 years. For selling, obviously, you may not want to. But from my experience, most of the alliums I've saved, I had a very good germ on them for at least 2 seasons. I think the reason we say 1 year is that by the time it ends up in the hands of seed companies and they germ test them, usually you're in year second almost. Like often, like if it's like a small scale local seed company, like the co-op and all that, you're gonna get the first year crops. But the other one tends to move them into a second year too. So because they have so short life, and it's annoying because also they are a crop that you start very, very early, and by the time you figure out they worked or not, you may be screwed. You may not be able to restart them again. So you don't want to take too much risk with onions too. So a good germ test is a good idea too, if you have saved any. But in terms of population size, I think it's on the higher end. I don't know, Jolene, if you had a chance to go look it up while I was talking.
I'm
Yeah,
trying.
so Matthew plopped a link into the chat
Oh, nice.
from Seed Matters. And on this table, it says a population of 50.
Okay.
And again, I would call that a very minimum population. If you're working with a variety and you're trying to maintain a variety, I think you probably want, I never get as many as I want. So if I aim for 100, I end up with 80. My advice, like Mel said, you don't get a second chance sometimes to plant those crops, so you have to start early. Just plant twice as many as you think you need right at the beginning. That's what I would normally do.
Yeah, population size are a tricky one. Like depending on the book you're reading, depending on the source you're reading, you'll see some variations. And I think like David mentioned too, there's like, it really depends what your end goal is. Like if it's like to improve a variety, you'll go higher numbers. If it's just to maintain the basics, traits of something, you can go a little bit lower. But you have to be careful and know that family or that species very well to know how low you can go without starting to sacrifice some of the good traits. And the only way to figure that out is almost to work with the crop for many years. So to follow the recommendation in the book, I think is a good starting point.
I know what I'll often do if I feel like I have had too low a number 1 year on a crop. Say I'm growing Stuttgarter onion out and I only had 50 this year, but I would have liked to have more. I might try to find that same variety grown by somebody else elsewhere and use some of those seeds to mix into the plants I have. As long as I've grown them out and think that they've, it's a good lot of seeds. There is a seed adjacent question here. Oxeye daisy is growing in a hay crop. Are there things that can be done to modify the soil to improve the hay crop and reduce weeds? This kind of feels like a question about how to not have something seed in your field. And this came from the Creston Seed Bank. Any of you guys have experience with I guess what I would throw out there, as I've been driving around with the seed cleaning trailer and working on helping like some farmers that are growing small lots of grains, there's often tons of weed seeds in the grain. And of course, this probably minimizes the amount of grain growing, but then in terms of soil health, it might be in some ways, maybe some of those weeds are actually beneficial for the soil. So I don't know that I would say they're damaging the soil so much. However, you can't really sell wheat with a bunch of lamb's quarter seed in. So I was at a place in Argenta cleaning seed and we cleaned out, I think, of 1,000 pounds of wheat. We probably had the equivalent of, I don't know, a cubic meter of lamb's quarter seed. So you can deal with that, I think, at the cleaning stage to get it out if you do have weeds in, but how to encourage oxeye daisy to leave your field, I'm not sure I have a strategy.
Yeah, and I'm not a hay grower writer, but with hay, I can see that's
Okay.
even more complicated than with grain, because the length of it and everything. And it is oxeye daisy. I'm not a livestock farmer except for chicken, but is oxeye daisy also toxic for some animals? Is that why the concern is with the having it in the hay?
I don't think it is. We have it in our hay. And I believe it not only spreads by seed, but it might also spread by rhizomes or underground. So, and I think it's also allelopathic like grain, where it competes really well and kind of takes over a section of the hayfield. We don't find it to be too much of a problem as far as taking over goes. I mean, it's out there and we just throw it in with our hay and we get little flowers in the hay mix. I was thinking maybe it preferred disturbance because you do see it move along roads and highways where there's been disturbance, but it also seems to establish pretty well as a perennial. I know for hawkweed, increasing your sulfur and increasing the nutrients of your soil do help you get rid of that. And I've also heard of kind of incorporating pigs and stuff to turn that soil so that you can kind of reseed and establish your more preferred species. But yeah, specifically to daisy, I'm not sure beyond that.
Any other seed saving questions? I'd also be happy to hear how your in-person seed saving workshops went.
We had a great time, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I see clapping there. It looks like you've got about 20 people in your room or so.
there's about 20 of us.
Nice.
We ran out of time.
Too many questions.
Yeah, too many questions.
But I have a question for you. So we had a longer discussion about GMO seeds and versus like what is it, hybrids. So I mean, there's a big discussion and doom of GMO products. But the question is more not right or wrong, but they can have the benefits or reduce pesticides. They can be water resistant or drought resistant or other characteristics that might be beneficial. So what is your opinion on that?
I have a short opinion I can just kind of throw out there in that I think I don't have any kind of, I'm not like anti or pro GMO. I consider it a technology that is available and it's how we use it, whether it's for good or bad, matters. But when it comes to agriculture and plants, I find the use of GMOs creates a very non-diverse crop. And even if it is bred to be drought tolerant, it's only bred to be that, and it doesn't have that diversity of our, more historic crops where we grew land races that could adapt to your region, adapt to the year-to-year climate. You select the best ones. So to me, GMOs, not only are they controlled by companies, so we can't get those genetics ourselves and we can't save the seed, but it's also seed that, yeah, maybe you can grow something really drought resistant or blood resistant or something, but you're creating a population of genetically identical individuals. And I see that as pretty problematic in agriculture, especially in the face of climate change. And the hybrids are another thing though, but I'll let someone else chime in.
Yeah, to add to that, like I do agree with Jolene. I think technology is just an interesting piece of technology, and it could be used for greater goods, and some even in forestry and other things that doesn't end up in
Yeah.
our food system. But beyond that, like I think even the traits, some of the traits you mentioned are traits that we can breed in traditional breeding technique, and even through hybridization. And I think that aspect of like who owns that the genetics and all that is a very important, and it's getting into the politics of seed saving and seeds, and you control the seeds. But there's also the aspect of like the diversity, and as we're going more and more into the climate chaos that we're going into as farmers, I think we really need to think more about like the diversity that we put into our crops and how resilient we can be in face of that. And definitely GMO and even some hybrids are not the solution to that. Those are a great solution for making sure you get a crop if ABC lines up perfectly. You got to get the best crop out of those. But ABC, in the last 5 years, I've never seen the ABC line up perfectly in any season. I've had more surprises than not, if it's anything. So, and I more and more, I'm going back to relying on even less hybrids and less of that type of like homogeneous crops that like will rocket on every good years, but could totally screw you over on other years that you haven't support yourself with like a more diverse crop. So yeah, and that's also hybrid is a very complex one, I think, and in the organic world even more, because we see hybrid like, and we've looked at hybrid for many years as one thing, but it's so much more than one thing. There is like, I don't know how many dozens of techniques that are used for hybridizing seeds, and some are more acceptable than other. And those are conversations we should have more of. And I think those are the conversations are coming up in the organic movement specifically, in terms of like, what do we accept us within the organic movement as being a seed that you could use and it's respectable. But that's another thing. It's another vendor box that like, it's, and the main problematic and all that, and goes back to like who controls the seed, is like a lot of time you will have those varieties that are released as hybrid, and that information is not available. It's like intellectual properties from the seed company. They're not going to tell you how they did it. So that gets really problematic too in itself. So although like, but I'll go back to my original point, which is like, I think a lot of the traits that we're looking for are available in the plants. We just need to relearn how to work with those plants and take a deep breath and do the work that needs to be done, instead of like not doing anything, and then needing it, and then needed to flip on a dime and do it within a year with the technology that will allow us to do that, but also erase all the other quality of that crop along the way. So when you work for years with one crop, you can see all this potential, and you can try to preserve all that potential as you're going towards that goal of either drought resistance and all that. You don't waste the taste. You don't lose, I mean, the taste of the crop. You won't lose the coloration. Like there's all those other traits that sometimes get lost in that quick journey towards one goal.
I think it's probably doesn't even need to be mentioned, but like the problem behind a lot of the corporate control of seed is that the end goal for them isn't even about whatever the trade is. It's about making profit, right? And that's one of my big problems with GMO and hybridization too, is that like the goals are just so strange and not conducive to the sustainability of our food systems. But I agree with everything that's been said. I'm just keeping quiet here because these two ladies know a lot more than I do.
I have a story from, I think it was Brian Campbell from Uprising Seeds was sharing with me, and it was around this idea of, you know, how do we compete with, I think there's this idea out there that GMOs are going to increase the yield of our seeds. All the modern breeding techniques and like genetic modification is how we can actually increase yields and feed more people. And there's a couple things wrong with that. I think one is I think we can already feed everybody in the world. I don't think that the yields of our plants are the things that are, you know, limiting our ability to feed people. But what he shared with me was a story of a corn grower he decided he wanted to get a higher yielding corn, and he had a nice sweet corn that he grew, and he did selection on that corn. And what he selected for was corn whose leaves are a bit more upright rather than outward. And over a few years, he was able to do that. And in doing that, he was able to decrease his planting spacing so he could fit more corn in the field. And I just thought it was a brilliant, very simple, it's an old school like breeding technique of just selecting from a population. And he was able to increase the yield of that corn in the field by doing that. I just thought it was like there's no high tech there. It's just thinking about the system and how your system works and what kind of traits your plants need in order to be better in your system. So. Any other comments or comments on genetically modified seeds, or any other questions about if there's a certain crop you're interested in digging into, we can do that. Like if it came up at your in-person workshop, there is a specific variety or a specific species you want to work on.
I would be curious to kind of ask a question to the group about hybrids. And, you know, there are the hybrids that are proprietary and we don't have access to the parent lines. But I think, you know, I'm really curious about breeding our own hybrids. Like if we have two varieties we really like, you know, intentionally letting them cross, maybe controlling the male and female lines and creating your own hybrid. Because when you produce seed, you can produce a lot of seed for several years. Has anyone experimented with that? I think maybe David, you've mentioned that before. Yeah, I don't know. Like, is anyone doing small scale hybridization for seed saving?
I haven't seen anybody do it. I totally think it's possible. Maybe I've just spoken about the possibility. But I do know that I think High Mowing Seed at one point was selling hybrid seeds, and they were selling the parent lines. So it was in a lot of ways, the challenge, like the problem I think that a lot of us here have with hybrids is that kind of ownership of the seeds. And that was a hybrid seed where the developers of that seed were actually sharing the parent lines, and they've put a lot of work into figuring out what the parent lines are. I think it was for a hybrid zucchini. So you buy 2 packs of seeds and you make your own hybrid seed. I don't know if they're still doing that, but that for me, that's the biggest issue I have with hybrids. So if we can be producing hybrids in the public domain, I think that would be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have any experience with it either. Most of the hybridization I've done is by accident. Just a cross that happened that I noticed the following year, and then I start working with that, which then I'm actually working on like dehybridizing it at this point. So it's not creating hybrids, it's the same process. So, but I think it will be interesting, but it's always been my challenge personally. I've always been thinking about that. I know that most of the time the hybrids are done with really inbred parents, and that's to get those inbred parents that intimidate more than anything else and doing the actual cross. And I'm not sure if I'm skilled enough or have enough time anyway to do it right now, but even if I had enough time to like how many generations it takes and like I have to learn that aspect of it. Yeah, I think we have a lot to learn that way, because I think there is definitely an interest that like if we were to able to create our own hybrid in that way, that we work closely with the plants and we just know that that cross will work and we're not keeping secret around it. And if other people wanted to take it from there, like I remember noticing Heimermann doing that a few years back, but I don't know if they're still doing it. That would be yeah, very interesting.
I guess the one other thing I'd mention about hybrids is that, you know, one of the characteristics that you get from a hybrid is uniformity, which in an industrial setting is very important. And I actually question whether that's an important characteristic for our home gardens or even small scale farms. And the other part of it is we often compare hybrids to OPs. And I know that John Navaggio in the past has said that's like comparing apples to cars or something like that, because there's been so much more work and resources and money and research that has gone into hybrid seed production over the last 150 years. And people just really haven't been working on those open pollinated varieties as much. So I feel like that's not going to be a question I'm going to answer in my lifetime, but I'm curious about whether we can keep working with these OPs and develop varieties that are at least as good and productive as hybrids.
Yeah, I definitely like the moving towards the direction of more diversity and not less. And that is the one thing at the back of my mind where it's like, oh yeah, but if you produce a hybrid, it's going to be again a genetically identical population almost. So you lose that variability. And what I love to see is mixes like Grexes, and where people are taking a population, several different varieties, mixing them together, and then we can keep playing around with that, and they can adapt to our climate back to the land race farming.
But at the same time, I would challenge that, like, I appreciate hybrid. We grow a lot of hybrid here, and it's also like we were trying to make a living out of selling vegetables.
Yeah.
Which right now, the price of lettuce, I may actually be rich by next year, but hopefully it will come back down. And I don't want to gouge people out. I want my food to be accessible. I don't want to raise my prices, and I want to be efficient enough, and I want to pay people that work for us good enough. So there's all that balance. And it's sad to say, but hybrid offer me that in some crops, like broccoli, and with there is a few crops that just hybrid is like you're going from 10% to 100%. And like as a small scale farmer, I try to make a living. I kind of need those. So like starting working towards I think David did a very important point. It's true that a lot of the OP, the reason they're at 10% of their capacity is because they have been neglected in the name of hybridization. And I don't know if anybody started doing their seed order this year, but I haven't double checked, but my gut feeling right now is that the price had gone up a significant amount. I'm just kind of is it just me, or is it just that this seems ridiculous already? I'm looking, and I haven't had time to go back to my last year's order and comparing the prices, but it seems like it had gone quite up. So that's is where we're kind of stuck. Me, the farmer, relying on hybrid, I have to get the seeds from that seed company. If I was relying on an OP in those time of price increase, I could start being well, you know what, I'll seed seeds from that one, and I'll start working with that crop, and it might worth it. So yeah, it's definitely on the radar right now.
I'll just mention it's why in a lot of our variety trials, whether it's the ones we do with farmers or gardeners, we often use hybrids as a check because we know that they produce really well. So, we did orange cherry tomatoes. We used Sun Gold because everybody grows Sun Gold and there's nothing that quite competes with it. And we were pretty sure that it would win out in the trials, but the point is that's where we're aiming. That's what we're trying to develop. Same with the carrot breeding project that we've got. We're using Bolero, which is a hybrid, as the check because a lot of farmers grow Bolero and it's a very high yielding, good orange storage carrot. So the goal is to try to eventually breed something that works maybe close to as well as Bolero, but that we can all save our own seed for. There's a question here about, it's not really seed related, but I might spin it into a seed related question. It's about garlic, vernalization, putting cloves in the fridge to plant out in the spring instead of planting in the fall. And some more gardening question than seed saving, but I will throw out that I'm just curious if anybody here has ever tried or has been successful in producing true garlic seed. And just so people understand that, I'll just give a bit of a garlic produces bulblets on the top of the plant. Those aren't actually true seeds. Those are genetically identical to the cloves. True seeds in garlic are something that doesn't happen very often. Only certain varieties will make it. In order to do it, I believe you have to pull out the little bulblets as they're forming so that the flowers in there can actually form seeds, and they might make some very small amount of low germinating seed. I'm just curious if anybody's ever played with that. And then feel free to answer that other question, who here plants garlic in the spring instead of the fall?
We've planted in the spring before. I've never grown garlic seed. I've thought about it and I've read about it, and it sounds hard. And I know that some varieties aren't even able to produce seed almost, like it's incredibly hard. Some varieties apparently are better at still producing seed. Yeah, it's a fascinating rabbit hole of research to go down. As for spring planting garlic, we've had success doing that. I don't think you need to keep it in a fridge. Just keep it in kind of a cool, dry place for the winter, and then plant it as early as you can. And it should still get that kind of month or so of cool time in the soil, and that should be enough to kind of get it to germinate. So you could put it in the fridge, but remember that you want to keep garlic very dry, and fridges aren't great for humidity. So a dry, cool storage, and then planting early in the spring will still give you a crop a little bit smaller, but we've done it successfully.
Yeah, I think what the garlic really benefit from being planted in the fall, mainly because it develops a little bit of roots and just started kind of waking up and set the roots. As soon as they get that little window of warmth, they can start uptaking nutrients and grow faster. So I'm not sure if, like Joey says, it's probably not as to do as much with vernalization, that it has to do with like the yield you're going to lose. It's not because that hasn't vernalized well and all that. I think it will all germinate fine if you plant in the spring. It's just that like little growth period that you're missing out on, because once you put it in the ground, then it has to wake up, put the roots out, and then start taking up nutrients. So you may be about a few weeks behind in the spring compared to planting in the fall. But I've known a lot of folks, like I haven't done it myself, but I've known a lot of folks that have planted in the spring and have fantastic crops. You could barely tell them apart from previous year, because it also depends on the year to the other how weather is in general.
Years ago I think we grew about 18 garlic varieties on our farm because somebody gave us a whole lot, and it was just interesting because you grow them all out and then you whittle them back because you don't like some, and so you choose the ones that are the best. And I remember one of the ones that for some reason I kind of liked it, but it just never grew very big, was Persian Star. It's if anybody grows that variety. And so I stopped growing it because it's like, it's not big enough. Apparently that is one of the best ones to do true seed from. And now I kick myself for not still having it. And it just, for me, it was a lesson. Like sometimes you don't know what qualities and characteristics you're going to want in the future. So I try to hang on to as much as I can now, I think. All right, are there any other questions? There was a message from the Squamish folk. They were having technical issues, so they said they had a really good in-person workshop, but they've headed out now. And so if there aren't more questions, we don't have to stay on the oh, maybe there's one coming up.
Okay, our group wanted to do a bit of a report on our session here.
Oh,
Here you
I got
go.
one more question.
Okay, we'll go ask that. Hi, here we are in Lillooet, and we had Mojave had to, unfortunately, a family crisis, so she ended up down in Idaho. So she was happy to be speaking from the Coeur d'Alene area, and we're here in the northern Stadtland territory, but Mojave's living in the Entlakapmuk Lytton area. So we had these 3 areas, which we were happy to be having us all here together. And we had 12 people that came in person, but we started at 10 o'clock, so people have sort of dispersed now. And then we had 7 people online, and it was really interesting. I felt Mojave's presentation was very good. We wanted to include yours too, David, which I had watched and thought also would have complemented Mojave's very well. But we didn't have time, unfortunately. It just turned out like that. But perhaps we can circulate that to other people that wanted to be here. And so that was good. But one of our people did have that onion question at the beginning, and now he says he has another question. So here's my neighbor, John Bradley.
Hi there. Yes, this is sort of a seed saving question. I grow 2 varieties of field corn, and because of my situation, I can't really separate it the distance that are required. And so I've done 2 each now over the years. I grow 1 variety each year, right? And then I'm separated by about, maybe 100 yards, 125 yards in different geographic locations within my farm. And what I do is I grow a largest section of corn as I can, and then I select from the middle, right? And then I just, and again, it's sort of like old school buffalo bird woman. I just take the ones I like, the way I look. And so I grow Painted Mountain and Nostine Dent, and they seem to be holding true, at least the Nostine Dent, still coming out yellow. And would that be sort of classified as a sort of seed saving in the sense that I could give my seed away? Because it's not going to be pure, because I'm always selecting, because I have corn from my sweet corn patch, which is about 150 yards away, right? So would I be able to, could I say, well, I have seed, I'm selecting for myself, and so it doesn't really matter to me, but so I just want to get some tips, and I'm selecting also for my geographic area and my farm too.
Yeah, I think 100% the seed. I mean, and it's interesting, guys, because you had Mojave, and I think I'm almost like gonna speak like the words of Mojave here. But what things that's very important with seeds is that the story of the seed come with it, and so you have that story right now. And that's what you've done with it. So when you pass on those seeds, just make sure that you share that story. So whoever gets it, they understand what's happening to the seed. So if there is one unintended cross or something like that, it'll be like, oh, that's probably what happened. And then but as long for like, I think the cross we don't want to see is those cross that kind of like with carrots, and you get that weed, yeah, Queen Anne's lace crossing in it, then the carrots get woody and it's not that nice to eat. But my guess is in your case, if it will cross with another sweet corn or another corn that you would have saved from anyway, and it would just be the corn. So yeah, I'd say like sometimes we get obsessive about like isolation distance and population size and all that, but depending on what your intention is, and even through the co-op, we had the discussion before, and I'm not sure where we're at with that right now, but we are selling some of our seeds that come with a story that it's not uniform, that was a cross like from 7 years ago, and it's still segregating. So you're still like, I have one beets like that. I think David has it too. It was a golden beets and the Chioggia beet crossing. And when you plant it, you're still getting those kind of orangey ones and some Chioggia in there. But we share the story, and that's in the seed description, and this is what you're buying. So I think we definitely should not stop ourselves from sharing seeds, even more when it's a sharing thing. But even if you're selling them, just make sure that the story comes with it, and you're sharing that part of the story, and yeah, you're transparent that way.
Thank you.
And I think with corn, I mean, I know for production purposes, if you don't want crossing and if you want seed, you can also stagger the plantings if you've got a long enough growing season, or if they have different maturation dates. So you might also have that added layer of segregation just through time.
I was going to suggest that exact thing, because you mentioned Painted Mountain corn, which I believe is one of the earliest, fastest tasseling corns. And if you're growing that and a flint corn, my guess is if you planted them at the same time, or if you planted the Painted Mountain even a week or two earlier, you wouldn't have overlapping flowering, and you might be able to save from both of those in 1 year.
in my technique, I've decided to just grow one variety because corn stays, and I just use it as a, like for food for the animals and myself. And so it doesn't really, I don't have to because I have enough to last me, because I'm just growing for myself, not for sale.
Right.
So I just do one variety, and that's just sort of, then the next year I just grow the other one. I'm also looking for another flint corn that's short, because I'd like to have a 3-1. I tried Oaxacan green, didn't last, it was too long for the season. So anyway, I'm up there if anybody has a suggestion, but that's how I do it. And it's not exactly pure seed saving, but it's the best I can do.
Tell the story.
Tell the story. And it'll be, hopefully, as long as I run the farm, I'll just run it that way.
Yeah, that's great. I'm also looking for a short season flint corn. I'd like to try it up north. We have a very short season. And I do know someone in Fort St. James who has been experimenting with different flint corn. So I'm gonna get a hold of her and find out if she has any recommendations and try finding out what's been working for her and try growing that out next season. So if that works out, I'll let you know.
Thank you.
Any other questions? You got so many of them answered at your in-person session there.
I might ask a question of the panel. Kind of a theme that's come up throughout the event is growing seed savers, not necessarily growing more seeds, but like having more people grow more seeds. And so I was wondering if you could share either what brought you or got you interested in growing seed, or any advice for growing a new seed saver.
I can go first. I was just waiting for my son to stop blowing loudly in his recorder in the other room, but you may hear some tooting in the back. This is something that I feel a little bit more capable of answering because my work has really been around seed libraries and trying to support community seed education. I don't consider myself to be I'm still a bit of a beginner seed saver, I think. But for growing new seed savers, I think exposing people to seed and the beauty of seed as it grows, right, and getting a chance to be connected in a hands-on way. And one thing that I see a lot with trying to expose people to seed saving and getting them interested is that it is quite daunting and overwhelming, and so trying to support people in having success and really trying as much as possible to make it accessible. It's pretty obvious, I guess, but when we get into these expert panels and talk about seeds and you hear people who have been sharing their amazing wisdom just here now, there's quite a lot to know about seed saving and doing it well, and that can be really overwhelming, I think, for people who are just getting started. And so trying to let them know that every try is a good try, and really celebrating people saving their own seed and then supporting them through the process of doing it generation after generation for the plants and learning as they go and trying to support that learning journey so that people get a chance that you don't have to learn it all intellectually first. Then the best way to learn it is by trying and making mistakes and understanding that you learn as you go, and that the process of seed saving is a beautiful one that connects you with the earth. And for me, that like one reason why I love seed saving so much is that it brings me into really close connection with the plants and animals that are in my garden. And so I get down on my hands and knees and I really have to pay close attention to when things are flowering and when things are starting to set seed. And so it's just this beautiful process of connection and paying closer attention and getting to know plants in a deeper way. and trying to foster that connection, I think, is a really great way to inspire people to get interested in saving seed, celebrating that, like that sense of wonder that can come with getting to know a plant in a deeper way, which is really what seed saving is all about.
I would say also another trick is beans. Beans is the gateway into seed saving for many reasons, because they're so pretty. Like a lot of them, like some are boring, but like a lot of beans are like just like people are just like, whoa, like it's like little treasure. Like it works well with kids anyway. But even I've seen so many adults reacting the same way as kids when they see beans. Like so that's a good sign. And also, which is nice with beans is that actually what you're seeing is probably what you're going to get, because they're self-pollinators. So it's less intimidating in getting into. They don't take as much space, except for they're pole bean and need a bit more infrastructure, but you could grow them in a small amount of space. I feel like bean is like a good gateway when you get someone into it. They're easier to clean too. You can even do it by hand. You could do the stumping. There's a lot of fun thing around beans. I think it's I definitely encourage folks to, if they want to encourage someone or invite someone to like crack some beans around like a cup of tea or something like that, get them into it. Or with kids, if you're working with kids program and all that, having them cracking open pods. Like it's even with my 2-year-old last year, I remember like I've never had like an activity that lasted more than 7 minutes. And then suddenly like she was sitting down there for like a good like 15, 20, just cracking beans open, bean pods after pod after pod. I had to go back downstairs to get another bag for her to get her going. And interesting, so I was kind of amazed of like that cracking noise. And there's something about it that's just like, so yeah, it touches humans like senses in a way.
Yeah, I think it's easy to overwhelm people with the amount of information that is out there around saving seed. And I find it really important to not do that and to never discourage seed saving. Whenever someone wants to save seed, it's just like, do it. Start with 1 or 3 varieties. Start with something you really like and something you want to make sure to preserve. Like it's not, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the exact population size. In fact, you probably won't get that in a small garden. And that's why things like seed libraries are such a wonderful resource, because maybe other people could grow that same variety and you can still preserve those genetics. But even if not, maybe you'll get an accidental cross. So yeah, I think there's a lot of information around seed saving, and it's always good to keep learning, but it doesn't, you have to be careful not to let that discourage. And a great way to, I think, get people in it is just exposing them, bringing them out to the garden, showing them the crops in flower and what happens and what it looks like when it's in seed. Cucumbers, I think, are always a fun one. Next after beans, of course, with kids, but showing them like, oh, how big do you think a pickling cucumber should be? And then showing them what a seed cucumber looks like. So yeah, and I think to answer your first question about getting into seed, one of the people who inspired me was Mel and Mojave, a workshop at the organic conference. And like David said, once you go seed, there's no going back.
Yeah, thanks so much for those answers. And thanks for the question, Jillian. Maybe just as we finish up the session, that was something that I thought about throughout this conference is, what would the message be at the end of the conference to all of you people who are here thinking of stewarding seeds? And for me, it was watching that Vandana Shiva movie. If any of you did, if you managed to get to see that, she's a very inspiring woman, and she's a spokesperson for lots of people. And what struck me at that, watching the movie, was not so much, I mean, her, of course, she's great, but the crowds of people behind her are the people that did all the work. Those are the ones saving seeds. Those are the ones she's speaking for. And it just felt like, yeah, this is the crowd of people that are joining here. This is the same crowd that's in behind Vandana Shiva. And I think the take-home message for me, and what I'd like to suggest that we try to do, originally before I saw that film, I thought, yeah, we're gonna have this, and then everybody's going to grow more seed next year than they did last year. And I'd suggest not doing that. Grow maybe better seed than you did last year, but find somebody to infect with the seed saving bug. And just let them know, if you get them into beans, it is like, as Mel says, it's a gateway seed. So they should know that they're probably going to get stuck and they're always going to be saving seed. But I feel like our community would be benefited more by each of us finding one person to infect with a seed saving bug than by trying to do more ourselves. So I just encourage you all to go away and do that. And then in terms of that intimidation of, yes, it can be challenging and you're not going to do it right. I think what I'd share with people as well is think of the plants that think of those seeds that you're not saving really well or right. Those are your teachers. You get to learn so much from all of those mistakes, probably more than if you did do it right. So it's not a failure if you didn't do a good seed crop. You've learned so much from it. So I just encourage everybody to do it and infect others to do the same.
Let's be the new pandemic. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Okay, I think unless anybody has another question, I think we can probably end the session and the gathering. And I'd love to just pop, if somebody has the link to our survey. We've been asking people after each session to fill out a survey response, and we're just going to plop that into the chat. It's really helpful for us to get feedback from people. You're only going to say really good things in person at these, but this is your opportunity to give us some feedback and criticism. And if you really like the session, it's really helpful for us to get that feedback as well. So does somebody from Farm Folk have? Okay, it's coming. And then the other thing I invite people to join up is if you want to get into a project with us, our Citizen Seed Trial registration is now open as well. So we will plop that in the chat as well.
Sorry, I can't seem to click into the chat for some reason. Like the least techie there. Thank you, Sarah.
There we go. Okay, there you go. That's the survey for us. And if anybody's interested, here is the link to sign up for the Citizen Seed Trial next year. And thank you everybody for showing up. Thank you so much for the panel for being here. And have a good hibernation.